Hello, dear learners. Welcome to this YouTube online video class. In today's class, we shall discuss about features of Victorian poetry. In the previous classes, we have seen about an introduction about Victorian age and the major developments that had happened in the Victorian age. So here we are going to learn about the important features of Victorian poetry. Victorian poetry is nothing but it's a poetry written during the reign of Queen Victoria, and Victorian literature is an amalgam of neoclassical and romantic literature. It means that in Victorian literature you can see the elements of romanticism and neoclassicism. And the literature of this period is going to reflect scientific advances and concern over social condition. Victorian poetry is very colorful. It is full of emotions, and humanitarian elements are there in the Victorian poetry, and it is didactic and intellectual. So, what are the conic themes or features of Victorian poetry? We shall see one by one. The first feature of Victorian poetry is realism. Here, Victorian writers attempted to produce art and literature an accurate portrayal of reality. Realistic, detailed description of everyday life and its darker aspects are presented beautifully in the Victorian poetry. Victorian poetry focuses on families, religion, social reforms, and other day to day activities. Another important element of Victorian poetry is humanism. Humanism is nothing but there is a concern for ordinary human life in Victorian poetry, and they depicted the emotions of everyday life of common people. And another next feature of Victorian poetry is socialism. In socialism, majority of the Victorian writers try to expose the social conditions of the contemporary life and how the society was disintegrated, and how the life which was affected by industrialism. And they also focused on the conflicts which were there between upper and lower classes of the society, and the pitiful conditions of the middle classes and lower classes who are supposed to be homeliness during that period. The next characteristic of Victorian poetry is criticism. Criticism means to criticize something, to condemn something. Victorian writers criticized the social life of that time because during Victorian period, majority of the people of the society were leading a materialistic life, and they were tilted towards luxurious life. And they also criticized contemporary industrialism in their poetry, and they condemned the ongoing political situation of that particular age. And some of the writers indirectly condemned and criticized slavery system which was being practiced during this period. And the another important characteristic of Victorian poetry is glory of the past. See, majority of the poets in the last class we had seen that Victorian poets turned towards middle ages. They found an interest in depicting the medieval art and culture. That's why they were fed up with the the present social conditions and the present way of life. That's why they found pleasure in depiction of culture and anarchy of the past in their writings. And the positive effects of Puritanism were also seen in the poetry of Victorian literature, and they highlighted religious and social ideas of the past in their writings, and some romantic elements were also there in the poetry of Victorian period. Modernism is another important characteristic of Victorian poetry. Here, individuality and seniority of modern era was given prominence in the poetry. Institutionalism, utilitarianism were the two basic philosophies. These were the modern philosophies found their way in Victorian literature. And the majority of the Victorian poets dealt with the serial moral issues of that time, like religious issues, thoughts, and above all, social life was their prime concern. Romanticism is another important characteristic of Victorian poetry. Actually, Victorian age was the bridge between romantic and modern literature. So, early Victorian writers continued the tradition of romantic literature in their poetry. Themes of love with nature was revived in the poetry of Victorian age, and nature was treated as a part of God, and imagination and fancy gained power again in Victorian fiction. Free Raphaelitism. It was a school, it was an intellectual movement of Victorian age. It proclaimed that science has nothing to do with art. It is named as art for art's sake. Free Raphaelitism movement was nothing but an artistic movement. It wanted to revive the glory of art and architecture, or especially it gave importance to paintings, and it gave importance to the painters who lived before Raphael. And these following are also the features of Victorian poetry. They found interest in medieval legends, myths, and fables. Realistic and less idealized view of nature was the characteristic, was one among the characteristics of Victorian poetry. Here, imagery was used extensively. Sensory images were used to describe abstract ideas such as the struggle between religion and science. Scientific temperament developed, and this led to the questioning of the existence of the God. Charles Darwin propounded the theory of evolution, and he published a book called Origin of Species in 1859. The very publication of the book stirred the religious beliefs of the Victorian period. Though the number of male poets was more, famous female poets like Elizabeth Browning, Christiana Rossetti, and Bronte sisters appeared and became famous during Victorian era. And one more important feature of Victorian literature is there was more production of lyric poetry than the Romantic age in this era. Though the Romantic age was known for its lyric poems, but more than that, here lyric poetry was written. And there was a mixture of genres. Lyric was incorporated with dramatic monologue or dramatic lyrics. And there was an interest and belief in the modern idea of invention. Influence of social Darwinism was also there in Victorian poetry. So this is about the features of Victorian poetry. In the next class, we shall see about the major poets and their contributions. Thank you.